Welcome to the Heart Rate Variability Podcast, where we explore the exciting science behind heart rate variability. The material discussed in this podcast should not be taken as medical advice. Please check with your medical provider to make sure any suggestions or strategies are right for you. Visit us at the OptimalHRV.com website to learn more about the Optimal HRV app, download a free copy of Matt's book, Heart Rate Variability, and also get show notes and additional resources around heart rate variability and its applications.
All right. And I think we are live. Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Optimal HRV podcast. Today, I am back with a previous guest, Miss Alicia Johnson.
Yes. Hi, it's nice to be here.
Yes. Well, great to have you back. And for those who may not have heard your first podcast, can you give a brief introduction on who you are and all?
Yes. So my name is Alicia Johnson. I am a Tri-3 student in the naturopathic medicine program. And I just recently was doing research over HRV and how different types of meditations and yoga affect HRV. One specifically I mentioned was Vipassana yoga, which showed to increase your high frequency and decrease your low frequency. So this meaning you have more parasympathetic activation, your body's in a good repair homeostasis state. And just recently, during the whole process of me doing the research, I started looking into how the menstrual cycle affected HRV because I noticed that my own menstrual cycle was fluctuating a lot. So I decided to look into the different phases, and that's where I'm at right now. So yeah.
Well, awesome. And that's going to be our big topic for today, is all about the menstrual cycle. And I'm very excited to dig into that. But before we do, you mentioned such a great little gem there about yoga and affecting the LF versus the HF. And for those of you listening who may not be 100% familiar with that, with HF, we are referring to high frequency. With LF, we are referring to low frequency. And the high frequency is going to be related to vagal tone, or the strength of your parasympathetic nervous system, essentially. So we want that to be a higher number, and the LF is going to be more related to your barrel reflex, or the withdrawal of your vagal system. So we want to see that number typically lower as well, with the exception of when we're doing our resonance frequency breathing. But with that, you said there was a specific type of yoga that you could do that increases those things in the direction that we want. So what was the name of that yoga that you had said?
Yes. So the meditation with the yoga, just any type of yoga, was Vipassana. So actually, let me make sure I get the correct spelling. Vipassana.
ANA. Okay. Yes, because that was, I wanted.
Right. Anyone can go on YouTube and look up different types of meditations, and it'll just walk you through.
Okay, awesome. The Vipassana yoga. Okay, I want to check that out for sure. And I know even Randy said that he tried that out and was really blown away with the results that it gave him too.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's good. That's good to hear.
Yeah, so I'm excited to do that. And actually want to have my wife try that. She is a big yogi herself too. So
nice.
Yeah,
okay.
We'll do a yoga meditation together.
It definitely has a change in perspective, I will say. And I think that also had to do a lot with decreasing the stress in order to have more variability in our HRV.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right. Well, awesome. Yeah, I love that. Okay, so we're going to get into the big topic for today, which is going to be the menstrual cycle and HRV. So before we get into the menstrual cycle, we all have a general idea of what the menstrual cycle is. And then there's 50% of us out there, right, approximately, who actually live the menstrual cycle once a month, right, or did for a time in our life. And and as you were just saying before we got onto this call, it's very different actually living in something than it is just hearing about something, right? So I can hear my wife talk about her menstrual cycle, and when for example, when we were talking about having children, and in the process of all that, right, I was intimately connected to her menstrual cycle and the fact that we were paying close attention to it as a team. But I still have no idea what that felt like. I still didn't completely understand it. So I would love to get a little bit more insight into this. So can you take us through what does that mean, the menstrual cycle, when somebody says that? What is that cycle? What are we talking about there?
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I can take you through that. I would like to say, just a little lighthearted, the first thing I will say is a lot of women will say we really only get 1 week out of the month where we're normal or feel normal. So that's like the first thing with the menstrual cycle. But the biggest thing with the menstrual cycle is that there are two big phases. There's a follicular phase, which is also our proliferative phase. And then we have a luteal phase, which is usually the day where we have like our ovulation, and then we're starting to build up that corpus luteum. So in the first stage, which is the follicular phase, you have endometrial tissue growing, repair and regeneration, you have low progesterone. And then also this is around like days 2 to 13, and then you start day 14 would be ovulation. Usually around the follicular phase for me, I'm very more high energy. I will say I don't have the normal PMS or emotional feelings. I just feel like I have a lot of energy though. Then when I transition into ovulation and the luteal phase is actually where we'll have like a lot of our highest progesterone, which stimulates LH, luteinizing hormone, to prepare the corpus luteum for implantation. And this is also around the area where we have higher body temperature too in the luteal phase. Me personally, during this phase, I can feel very maybe agitated. I do notice that I'm a lot more hot. I sweat a lot more. I may feel a lot more agitated, irritated, or getting closer to menses, a little bit more emotional. And we also get a lot of what's the word? Hunger, cravings too around that time, I've noticed. But the interesting thing that I found with the menstrual cycle in comparison to HRV is that in the follicular phase, this phase is where our parasympathetic nervous system is more active. So in the research, it's found that we have a decreased LF and an increased HF within this cycle.
Very interesting.
This is also where we have estrogen dominance from increase in FSH receptors too. Then in comparison to the luteal phase, this is where we have our highest sympathetic outflow. So this was also where I said, I feel more agitated. Our body temperature is higher. We have increased LF and decreased HF. And the interesting thing that I found with the different type of research is, and this is another thing that I wanted to say was, this research and looking into this has taught me more that HRV and the effects of HRV on our body is more about how our muscle and how we expend our energy, more so than the hormone fluctuations affecting the HRV. And it brings me back to how we talk about the diaphragmatic breathing and how stress can physically induce our body to break down or to have tighter tension or things like that. And I think this research that I had looked up really showed that. And the other thing was, a lot of this research has been fairly new. So I've been getting a lot of articles from 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2017. To me, this is really good because it's starting to get more talked about. However, I feel that in order to make a clear conciseness of what is really going on during the menstrual cycle and how it affects physical performance and muscle tension, exercise, and your increase in HF or LF has more to do with how you are expending that energy. I say this because there was one study that I found with young women in medical school, actually, and they looked at the results of stress on the menstrual cycle, and they did HRV testing. And specifically what they did was they put a cotton ball up under the girl's mouth in the morning, and they tested saliva cortisol levels. The only thing about this was they weren't consistent with measuring all the girls' follicular, luteal, and ovulation stages. So they just kind of based it on, oh, we'll do it in the morning, we'll do it towards the night, we'll do it this week. It was just the data wasn't consistent with it. But at the end of the study, they had said that the cortisol stress and HRV wasn't related to the cortisol, that it was actually independent of it, regardless of where they were in the menstrual cycle. And this study was done on women who had regular menstrual cycles. So then I found another study that actually compared women who had irregular period cycles compared to regular period cycles. And they actually did a study with them for 8 weeks, I believe, and they did intensive exercise during as well. The other study did the intensive exercising too. And with the women in the regular study, it showed that they both had the same amount of cortisol fluctuations during, regardless of whether they had irregular or regular periods. And it was more so delineated that the exercise and the intensity had more of an effect on their HRV. So then I started to look more into, okay, I'm seeing that a lot of this data and this new research is coming out is that they're testing gonadotropin hormone, they're testing all these hormones, and then they get to the end and they're like, all of this data is independent compared to the intensity of the exercises. So then I started looking into the intensity of different exercises that we could utilize during those different menstrual cycle phases. Sorry if I'm talking live, my mouth is getting.
No, you're
Good. Go ahead.
So this is so great, and it's funny to watch your brain work, because we can see where you started, and then we can see the rabbit hole gets a little deeper, and then it gets a little deeper, good. And then it gets a little deeper and a little deeper, right? And the problem with these rabbit holes when we get into our research is that they just don't end.
Yes, exactly. Okay, I was just making sure we're keeping up.
Yeah. And actually, at least before we go any further with that, because I do want to come back to that with the intensity of exercise. Yes. I just want to reverse out for 1 second and make sure that we recap on a couple of things that you said early on to make sure that everybody is with us. And that is, so when you were talking about the menstrual cycle in general, so that yoga that you had talked about, the Vipassana yoga, and I may be pronouncing that completely incorrectly. The benefits that you see with that yoga, you yourself and all other women are getting this as a result of your regular menstrual cycle. You're getting similar benefits of that decreased LF and the increased HF for the beginning part of your menstrual cycle every single month, and that is so cool. So excuse me. Sorry, we're both getting a little bit of the dry mouth, right? And what's so cool about that is planning phases, right? If we know that our body is more capable and more powerful in particular parts of the month versus others, we can plan our life accordingly, right? Exactly. And there's so much power in knowing that, in understanding that I'm not going to load this part of the month super heavy because I know that I am not going to be physiologically capable of handling as much as I can in this part.
Exactly.
So just that piece alone, understanding that, gives you such a freedom of saying, oh my gosh, it's not just me, right? This is everybody. So why am I stressing myself out about this? I just need to change the way that I plan things so that it matches me. And of course, like when we were talking about finals just before we hopped on here, You can't always change things like finals, but there's other stuff in your life that you can change to make that better. Or you can do things like the meditation yoga to make sure that even when you're not in the best part of the month for yourself, you can boost that up, right?
Exactly.
So and then I find it interesting that yes, then for the remainder of the month you actually do a vice versa. So that not so cool.
Yes, not so cool.
And for men listening out there, this is such a great thing to understand as well. Like naturally, your sympathetics are ramping up, right? So we just have to think about what that means, from an outsider perspective. When somebody's sympathetics are up higher, right? Does that make sense that they might be a little bit more on edge?
Right. Yeah.
So yes, it's there's so much power in just having a very general understanding of these things,
right?
And just understanding our partner that your capability is to handle, and your capability to be there, even as a partner, as as a mother, as whatever, is going to be totally different in one part of the month versus the other. And then that gives us an opportunity, in my eyes anyway, to help support more in those situations.
That's so interesting that you say that, because in doing the research, I actually shared my HRV with my boyfriend, and I tell him about it too, and he knows like when my cycle is, and so he's actually seen where it's gone down during certain times of the month or during mid-season, and so he understands. He's like, that's interesting, like now I can know if you're being a certain way or how I can support you. So that it really is, it does help with that too. So
yeah, that is so cool, and ultimately brings you closer as a couple to those kinds of things too, which is very cool. Excuse me. So then we started talking about, so from there we started going down and talking about how you see this relating to the amount of energy expenditure. And I thought that was such an interesting way that you chose to phrase that, because you didn't say exercise, you didn't say sitting in front of a computer, you said energy expenditure, because that can equate to so many different things, including just fluctuations with your basal metabolic rate, that can be coming about as a result of these changes that are happening within your body. And if your sympathetics are higher, then we know energy expenditure is higher. So what do you mean specifically by energy expenditure, or is it just a broad term of anything that's expending mental, physical, emotional energy? If you could expand on that just a little.
So I would describe energy, from doing all this research, I would describe energy expenditure as something that we have to look at as, in times when our body is in a good parasympathetic state, sometimes we do need a stressor in order to keep us balanced. Or sometimes when we are in a high stressful state, this time or maybe today, I don't need to do heavy lifting weights. So let me do a yoga exercise or something that can calm me down, that doesn't allow my muscles to do more work and more energy because I'm already so tense, I'm already so tight, and so that kind of correlated into the energy expenditure. In one article, they actually mentioned the menstrual cycle is just a cycle of energy. Amount of high energy being exposed in the female body. And so I kind of correlated that with energy expenditure with exercise. And so that's how I kind of ended up finding an article about how they mentioned about muscle groups employed and the mode of action seem to be stronger modality related factors, such as dynamic versus static, different types of exercises. And so that's how I really got into defining energy expenditure. So it can be a good thing, and then it can also be something that we need to back off on at times.
I love that you said that. And for those of you who might be watching this on YouTube or whatnot, you might have seen me give a little a cheers there. Um, so that is exactly it, though. Alicia, you hit it right on the head. Um, when we're in a parasympathetic state, do we need something to jostle us? Yes,
Right.
absolutely. And if we are overly sympathetic, do we need something to jostle that too? Yes. Um, there's within heart rate variability, there is there's something that we refer to as the coefficient of variation, and that is how much does your HRV vary essentially within a time period. So let's say like over a week's period. Do you stay pretty much flatline throughout that week, or are you way up and way down and way up and way down? And actually we see that people who tend to be on the healthier side tend to have a higher coefficient of variation.
Right.
And that's because you're never truly letting your body settle in to any of these states, right? You're always providing some kind of challenge, but then you're allowing recovery. Then you're providing a challenge, right? Then you're providing time for recovery. And that's what we like to see. And that's exactly what you hit was that, yeah, we don't want to stay stagnant with anything. Right. And it's so great to challenge your body in these times in the way that it needs it. Because when you're in a sympathetic state, a challenge for your body might be sitting still.
Right. Right.
So yeah, so that's so cool to point that out. Okay, and I'm sorry, so to continue on with the with the exercise, so you were going down the exercise hole, and then we started talking about cortisol and everything too. So was there more that you wanted to talk about with exercise, or?
Really, I was just going into the exercises that I did during each of the phases, and then how my HRV fluctuated afterwards. So, yeah.
Okay, so can you expand on that a little bit more? So I know that you had said you do to support each phase, but so like let's start with what we would consider in the follicular phase, or days 1 to 14. What do you do to support your body, or to quote unquote jostle your body out of that parasympathetic state that you're in?
Yeah. So this time is around the time that I would do more running, hiking, spinning, cycling classes, a lot of static exercises. And I did this specifically because in one article, it talked about how static exercise increased your HRV more than it did dynamic. And so around this time, for a follicular phase, you're in a parasympathetic state, so you want a lot more challenge around this time. You want to do a lot more cardio, a lot more heart pumping, HIIT workouts. And during this time, I started off in the follicular phase, because I'm usually around an HRV or RMSSD of 149, 130. And so I decided not to do any of that cardio or the exercising. And so when I didn't do that for a while, it dropped down to 85 and 60. And then I was like, okay, so maybe I do need to, do a little more cycling, do a little more cardio, high intensity workouts. It's more so about the intensity. And so once I did that, went back up to 105 and 151 the next following 2 days.
That is so cool to see. And for those of you listening who are a bit jealous of those numbers too, let's keep in mind that Alicia is in her early 20s,
Yes.
and she's a former track athlete. So, we don't have to be that jealous.
Right. Yeah, my numbers are pretty high. It's kind of shocked me too, but
well, that's what you get for being healthy. That's
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Kudos to me.
Yes, absolutely. So that's really cool though. So you could see such a dramatic change just from essentially decreasing the amount of cardiovascular activity, or the intensity was what you found to be more the thing for you, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And then another thing that you had said that I found interesting in there was that you said static exercise tend to be more effective at raising HRV than dynamic type exercise.
Yes.
Okay, and I do find that interesting that's the case. And now you're talking about like doing like running on a treadmill versus running outside in that kind of a
Really just any running, just as long as it's one static movement. So
okay.
like the cycling, the running, swimming, things that are going to get you into like a consistent state.
Okay.
Like one research that I did, and they did static and dynamic, they mentioned during like the 5-minute recovery period, it was reported that heart rate recovery, as well as the recovery of RMSSD, was more rapid following exercise involving a smaller muscle mass or energy expenditure. So muscle mass expenditure and energy are determinants of post-exercise parasympathetic reactivation. So that's where it really got me thinking about, okay, so it's more to do with like the muscle mass, the energy within the muscle that we're using.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. So this is really cool. And all right. So when you said that the static versus dynamic, I was confused in my head about exactly what you meant there.
Yes.
Because I'm like, well, you're not sitting still for either of those. So it's more of a static, continuous motion type exercise.
Yes.
Okay. So I
With
understand what you're saying with
high
that.
energy, more intensity.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'm wondering if the predictability of the continuous movement allows your body to adapt to that, and possibly entrain something with that. And that's something I'd have to look into myself. But it's very interesting that versus like, so I'm imagining like playing a sport, for example, would be what they would consider, a dynamic in this case.
Yes.
Okay, and that would not have such an effect on the heart rate.
Yes, correct.
Hmm.
And this is a thing where I feel like when I said there's a lot of new research coming out, but also a lot of the new research is and what I also question is how are we going to standardize intensity of these different workouts versus static and dynamic? And that I was going to mention that was kind of like a flaw within the research that I'm seeing, is that how do we define what is like a standardized measurement of movement for energy expenditure and intensity in order to measure that? So I had the same question too.
Yes, I guess that's where the further you get into research, the more questions you have. And a big challenge with that too is everybody would have a very different definition of intense. Because for example, somebody who ran track for years, your level of intensity, your level of what you consider intense, is going to be quite a bit different than somebody who's never done a 5K, right? So those are big factors within there too. But
exactly.
But yeah, there's definitely ways that you can work with that and make it all happen. But yeah, those make research very challenging, because it's very hard to standardize something like that.
Yeah.
But okay, so very cool. Can we go back and touch on the cortisol thing too? So you had said one of the studies showed that that cortisol was not related to the phase of the menstrual cycle, and then the other studies showed that it was. Or I'm sorry, can you say that part again?
So both of the studies focused on intensity exercises and measured the amount of cortisol, gonadotropin hormone, that was involved during this session. So one was 8 weeks and the other was 30 days. And what they had necessarily found was they were hoping that they can make the correlation between, it was specifically cortisol and like the stress induction that induced the HRV, but they did it in the way that was able to separate regular menstrual periods compared to irregular menstrual periods. And so by doing so, that was kind of like the delineating factor to kind of determine if it really was the cortisol levels in the throughout the menstrual cycle that affected HRV while they were doing the intensity. So intensity work exercises, they increase sympathetics, they increase cortisol secretion. And so what they're saying is that their measurements on what they were measuring was wrong, and they should have done more intensity exercises and intensity measurements, i.e. making sure that they did counteracted like a high intensity exercise in a follicular phase, or counteracted doing a high intensity exercise during menses. And so both of these studies, they ended up finding that cortisol wasn't a direct effect on how it affected HRV. It was more so because they found that both of the research studies didn't have a huge effect in both of the two irregular and irregular women. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So exercise was the bigger determinant,
Yes.
or level of intensity of exercise.
Yes, the level of intensity, which makes it harder for, I think, a lot of this research study to actually get consistent data with clarifying what exactly is affecting the HRV.
Okay.
During the menstrual cycle.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because I would have, I would have assumed that cortisol would have been one of the
Right.
bigger drivers.
Right.
So that's interesting to hear that's not what they're finding within there. But then it also is very empowering to hear that, to say that you have a lot more control over this than you thought you did.
Right. And I want to touch back. I think it's more so on how cortisol does have an effect, but you do have more of an effect in changing it and how it turns out, or what the levels are. So
Yes.
I think that's more so what the research needs to be focused more on, because regardless, you still are going to have that cortisol increase, but how are you manipulating that during different cycles or different times throughout when you are having stress? Yeah.
Well, and this just supports, what we all kind of already know as commonplace, and I'm sure it's in the research published as well somewhere, that women who exercise consistently have less of an issue with PMS, and
Right.
less issues with their cycle in general. So it is very interesting to hear that, or I mean to hear what you had said, and then just reflecting back on something like that, that it is a very empowering thing, and it is very much that we can say, oh wow, like yeah, I do have some control over this, and I love how you put that too, that yeah, if you're paying attention to your cycle and you know which phase you're in and you know where you're at, you can really be changing some of this stuff for yourself,
Yeah.
and really controlling your own biology, right? Which is wonderful. And
I think we have more control than we think sometimes.
Yes, we do. And I love just when you do your resonance frequency breathing, for example, you can watch how your heart rate changes with your breath, and you can realize that, oh, I can actually change my heart rate. Something that is ingrained in all of us to think that we have no control over, yet you can watch yourself literally change your heart rate. So it's very cool. And then you can take it to the next level like that. Not necessarily that you can change when your menstrual cycle happens, but you can change the outcome of of that.
Right. With like when I was doing my research and cutting back on like heavy lifting weights during the luteal phase, which also is like our highest sympathetic outflow, even then it showed me that if I did the opposite of what my body was doing, or kind of toned it down, my HRV did increase, or it did stabilize during the times that I'm usually more agitated. So I think, even like I said before, like you are the best person to really try to experiment with and get a feel of what's going on with your body through it.
100%. So do you feel like, as a result of paying attention to this, then and programming your workouts as such. Do you find yourself in a much better place, and even to the point, does your boyfriend, or those friends closer to you notice a difference with that too?
Yes. So I notice the difference a lot with my energy. If I'm not if I'm in a high parasympathetic state and I'm not doing anything, I usually have a lower depressed mood sometimes, I feel, or I just feel more sluggish, if that makes sense. And so like the other day, I decided to go work out, do some high intensity bicycling, and I felt immediately better afterwards. Like it was the medicine that I needed. And then also too, I would say people around me notice it too, can notice it too, the difference, or I talk about it so much so they're aware of how it can really affect or show just by looking at it on their phone.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. And I'm imagining that that you've probably been tracking your cycle for quite some time, even prior to looking at this with HRV, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, I have.
And is there a specific app or anything that you use for tracking, or do you do that with a calendar, with a with an old paper and pen calendar?
With the paper and pen calendar? No, I don't have time to keep up like that. But I do have an app. People really did that back in the day. Is that back in the day or now? I don't know. But
I still use a paper and pen calendar, so but
really?
that's just me. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I need to do that too. But I use an app. It's called Period Tracker, and you can actually download it from Apple. And it has a white background with a pink flower, and it will say Peach Tracker on the app.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, and that's it's so cool to just have some tools like that. And I know that there's obviously we don't have any connection with them. You're not there's no benefit that you're getting other than you use their app.
Yeah.
And I know that there's several of them out there. So that one you've just tried and you've enjoyed, obviously.
Yes, I've been using this for a really long time, actually. So you are able to see a whole entire calendar, and it shows the period, when you're fertile, ovulation. You can mark when you've been intimate, and it can show you an estimated fertile window, estimated ovulation, future period, possible period day. So yeah, it's a nice app to use, and I've been using it for, I want to say, over 5 years now.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
And you just struck something right there that I do want to bring up, and by no means what we're promoting with the podcast, but some of the other power in tracking your cycle is that that's some of the most effective birth control,
It
and some of the most effective in the birth process, right, in the getting pregnant
right.
process as well, is knowing when your cycle is actually happening,
Right.
naturally, when you are fertile versus when you are not. If pregnancy is something that you're trying to avoid, that's one of the most effective ways, is just simply looking at the calendar, and taking your temperature and tracking other things like that as well too. And equally, when you are trying to get pregnant, that is some of the most valuable information, is that right there, just being familiar with your cycle. So it's very cool what regular tracking of your cycle can provide.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely nice to have. And then now also using it with HRV and comparing the dates, it's nice to see the correlations.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. So I mean, obviously I know you know yourself pretty well at this point with both HRV and tracking your cycle. But is it pretty consistent then that you can see that change happening in HRV right about the time that you are changing phases within your cycle?
Yes, absolutely. Very consistent. Like I will say, when I'm coming out of the follicular phase and I'm going into ovulation, I'll usually drop down about 88. And then I might go back up and fluctuate about like 131. And then when it comes to the luteal phase, I'll go back down to 87, 80. So I can actually tell when it's getting ready to start or I'm in that phase. And that kind of lets me know, what to do or things that I can do for myself during that time. And it has been consistent. I would say it's something that I will continue to use and keep track of, just because I've seen the difference in my own like mental state and clarity too.
So I need to take a second and go back on what you just said there. So
Yeah.
you said that your change each month on average is a change from, you said 130 to into the 80s.
Yes, into the 80s, like around my like site when I'm getting ready to begin my cycle, I will drop down into the 80s, 88s. And this is if I'm not doing any type of exercise or if I'm not just keeping active. I've noticed that. But when I am active during those times, or I lowered my intensity down during those times, it helps bring up my HRV levels, and I fluctuate in between that range every time during the luteal phase, and then luteal menses, and then I go right back to like 131s or things like that. But I feel like I've always experienced a lot of hormonal fluctuations with my cycle.
But I mean, Alicia, that's just like to hear you say that, that it's that much of a fluctuation, right? And you are the picture of young and healthy, right? So to let everybody else hear that as well, so thank you for sharing your own personal data. It is something that is just so amazing, because I didn't even realize that myself, that much of a fluctuation can be happening just as a result of this regular menstrual cycle. Because if I saw that within, if I'm looking at a patient's data and I see a change that significant, I say, oh my gosh, this person's getting sick. Oh my gosh, this person did the most strenuous workout ever yesterday. Oh my gosh, this person, there's some kind of huge strain on this person. And indeed there is, right? There is a huge strain on your body. Actually, I believe it is termed the most inflammatory process your body will go through each month.
And it's like, it goes to show too that during those times, like that's where yoga and vipassana meditation can come into play, because not your body's going through so much stress, so you are also stressed too, in a sense, subconsciously. So it's good to really pay attention in those times in order to have that, and that's how it can play a part into those fluctuations.
Yeah, wow. Well, that is just so awesome to hear that. That's this is normal, right? This is what normal looks like for somebody who is healthy and young. For those of you who are like, oh my gosh, I see this and these things are happening, that's okay. That's okay, because this is what normal looks like. So
now, granted, you have to put into being a medical student too, so the stress of that. So
yes,
it can be a lot more intense. I think it's a lot more intensified during that time.
Yes, I don't doubt that. Yeah, you have a little extra stressors on your plate. So it's I just like to see that, because there's so many people out there who we sit here and we sit behind our walls and we go, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me. Oh my gosh, why is this happening? Why is this happening? So to hear that is just is so powerful in itself. So thank you. And then you had said mental clarity as well. And I know a lot of this we've talked about a lot of physical things. But mental clarity, your physical performance is one thing, but your mental performance, your emotional performance is the whole other side of this coin too. And obviously that's going to fluctuate with these things, just as we would expect, that you're much more capable of mental and emotional tests in that first part of the cycle, and rather than the second. And is that correct there? But
yes, correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And then And now you were saying though that in doing these the yoga practice, the meditation practice, that you find that mental clarity returns pretty quickly then, or quicker than it would have.
Yes, returns more quickly, and it seems that I'm more, I wouldn't say unfazed, but just more adaptable to, less reactive, less tense in a way. So yeah, I would say it would be like that.
Okay, awesome. And that's well, the definition of your HRV being high, right, is that you are more adaptable.
It seems like it's like my threshold has been, adjusted in a way that I could perform better or have more energy throughout the day instead of feeling tired. So
Yeah.
it's a nice thing to see.
Very cool. Yeah, you see that threshold go up, or we like to talk our window of tolerance, right? How much nonsense can we deal with, or how many final exams can you deal with?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So well, awesome. Okay, so Alicia, was there anything else that you wanted to touch on, or anything else that you wanted to add to anything that we've discussed today?
No, I think I tried to touch on everything. Yeah, I think I touched on everything pretty much.
Okay, well, awesome. And I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking about this. This is a huge topic, and I feel like even though we did get pretty into it, there is so much more yet to discuss in this topic. So
yeah, a lot more. And I'm sure as the time goes on, like I said, it's been a lot of new research. So I'm sure we'll start seeing a lot more different studies coming out in the future too. But in the meantime, I really plan on getting more into this with my own life.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing, and hopefully we can have you come back on again at some point. Not during finals week, and and we'll catch up on some more research here.
Okay, I look forward to it. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much.